Well, good morning, everyone. Really looking forward to this presentation. I'm going to cue it up with some thoughts on the front end, and then we have a great panel of experts who are going to talk about how we can be challenged as an industry, not to compete against payday loan stores, but to be relevant, more relevant to the underbanked by offering these payday alternative loans or short-term loans where people need this money for whatever purpose, whether it's an emergency or to get ahead. And so the challenge here on the front end, I was a little bit nervous about talking too much about payday lending because my message is not that credit unions should be payday lenders. There's a negative stigma associated with that type of lending. My message is it's not a matter of if, but how credit unions expand their social mission to better meet the needs of the underbanked. So think about that as I go through my opening comments and as we engage with the panel. Now, there's a parallel to these neobank and challenger bank organizations that are mostly venture capital funded, and they're popping up every day. And when you see the messaging and you see the product features, you'll see that there's an overlap because they're targeting millennials and they're targeting underbanked, financially challenged consumers as well. So I'm looking forward to adding a few comments here on the front end before we bring up the panel. So managing money has become very complex, especially for young people, especially for those who are less financially educated. Our heads spin at the number of offerings and the types of things, whether it's robo-investing or neobanks or online lenders or payday lenders, personal financial management options, reloadable debit cards, companies like Green Dot. And the choices for millennials in particular, and for underbanked who are left out of mainstream banking. This is a complex world. And I came across recently a slide that really kind of brought it home for me because we think of credit union services and financial services as checking accounts and auto loans and mortgage loans and brick and mortar and sort of traditional banking. But when you think about it from the eyes, especially of millennials and underbanked, they need to pay someone. They need to pay the rent, they need to pay a friend, they need to pay back mom or dad, hopefully, and find quick, convenient ways to do that, to pay the bills or to pay someone. They need more money, they need cash, sometimes quickly, sometimes in an emergency. And to a lesser extent for the underbanked, but certainly millennials who are out of college and are starting their careers, they need to find some cost-effective ways to manage that nest egg. So our traditional offerings, you can see on the slide, checking accounts, debit, credit cards, ACH wire transfers, automatic bill pay, certainly the traditional loan offerings and savings and investment services. But in today's world, when you look at how millennials, the messaging and the features that are being put in front of millennials and financially challenged, to pay someone, Venmo's a verb now, right? So whether it's an app-based P2P transfer app like Venmo or PayPal, their digital wallets, the neobanks, reloadable debit cards with all these whiz-bang features that we're going to talk about, retailer rewards. You look at on the borrowing side, yes, payday lenders, mobile offerings, what Quicken Loans has done to mortgage lending. We're in a completely different world, right, with the kinds of offerings. Protecting the nest egg, we have Acorns and Robinhood, small dollar fractional share investing, robo-investing, and we're trying to stay relevant in all this. And I again think that it's not a matter of if credit unions should compete well and serve effectively the underbanked. It's not a matter of if we should improve our feature suite on our existing products. It's how to do it. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. With a backdrop, I love the fact that this topic is appropriate because no urban area has been harder hit than Detroit. We had that so-called lost decade on the front end of the Great Recession, the auto jobs and supplier jobs that left Detroit Metro and Detroit proper in particular. And the renaissance and the comeback of our big city is phenomenal. But there are huge challenges facing urban areas and Detroit in particular, and with that as a backdrop, it's appropriate for our credit union movement to be gathered here to talk about not if, but how we do a better job of serving the underbanked and evolving to have the technology features that we need. This slide just reinforces what you're so well aware of. 80% of consumers living paycheck to paycheck. 40% can't cover an emergency expense that might pop up. You're familiar with all these stats. 25% of consumers nationally are underbanked. A smaller portion are unbanked. They don't have a traditional checking account and banking relationship. A larger portion of that 25%, they have a mainstream checking account, but they're using one of these alternative financial services, whether it's payday lending, check cashing, title loans, or whatever they might be. So a big differentiator, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir. You know, consumers trust banks to keep their money safe. But when it comes to banks, consumers don't trust that bankers have their financial interests at heart when it comes to referring programs and making pitches to bank customers. But our research shows that credit union members are at least twice as likely to trust your value pitches. So think about that as a reminder. The huge array of fintech companies, we hear about it at every conference. And one of our panelists, Sean King, who will be coming up, he provided this slide that categorizes the different companies that you see here. And I'm going to talk a little bit on the front end about, we're going to touch on 4 of these categories. The prepaid disruptors, neobanks and challenger banks. The difference between a neobank and a challenger bank is just simply that neobanks are powered by an FDIC-insured bank. So Chime, they have a reloadable debit card. They have 2 million customers, but their model is powered by Bancorp, an FDIC-insured bank. In the case of challenger banks, these actually are entities that have obtained bank charters, but doing a lot of the same things. And then, of course, in the area of credit and lending disruptors, I can't talk about my company, Dave, I wish. I'm going to talk about Advance America and Payday lenders in particular, because we don't have time to talk about all these other disruptors. So the payday lending industry, check cashing, payday lending industry at a glance. 12 million customers. 6% of the US population has used a payday loan store at some point in the last couple of years. They really focus on lower income, obviously. 76% earn less than $40,000 a year. It was interesting to me that when you look at the growth of the payday lending industry, they've really only been around in any big way since 1993. 83,000 employees, 15,000 stores, and although their growth has slowed in this very expansive, positive economy we've had, their growth will be back, make no mistake.
Americans will spend more than $7.4 billion on payday loans this year, much if not most of the cost actually doubling the loan amount.
If you borrow $400 on a payday loan, you may carry that loan for 5 months and end up paying a total of $900 in principal and fees.
Nick Bork at Pew Charitable Trust helped research payday loans, where in-depth interviews with more than 700 payday borrowers were conducted.
7 out of 10 payday loan borrowers are turning to payday loans for regular living expenses like rent and utilities.
And thus starts the vicious cycle that includes compounding of finance charges that translate into yearly interest rates of 200%, 300%, 400%. Because
if the borrower cannot repay on the next payday, then they'll usually go in and renew the loan, or they'll pay it off and then reborrow it a few days later when they need to pay their rent or some other bill.
Payday loans are under increased scrutiny, but as long as they're legal, financial advisors say borrowers should consider other options, like a trip to a pawn shop.
Things like getting help from family or friends, or selling or pawning possessions, or of course tightening their budgets.
Pew's research shows 19 million Americans will use payday loans this year, even though it's, quote, highly unrealistic for borrowers to think they will repay the loan on their next payday. Chris Clackham, NBC News.
I showed this news clip because it reinforces the negative stigma. And yet, like with everything in the news today, whether it's CNN or Fox News, you can't believe everything in terms of the messaging. Payday lenders are not all bad. What they're doing is not all bad. To a great extent, I believe they're very transparent, they're very regulated. And the question becomes, is this an area that we should be working in to meet the needs of consumers so they don't get taken advantage of by the spiral of debt and the rollover loans, right? So payday lenders in Michigan, 555 stores. The biggest players are national companies like Advance America and Check and Go. And although the number of stores has not been growing as quickly, more and more of these loans are being done online by these providers. And I don't need to tell you about the fee structure, but where the devil's in the details, you know, the Michigan Credit Union League and CUNA are not, might surprise you, we're not advocates of putting more regulations and restrictions on payday loan pricing and credit union pricing. Because in the case of these types of loans, this example given, a $500 loan with the associated $15 per $100 fee. Yes, it's a $65 fee for a 2-week loan and a $500 loan, and yes, that equates to 340% APR. But the Federal Credit Union Payday Alternative Loan Program, or PALS, allows for similar types of lending, but restricting the rollovers. State-chartered credit unions in Michigan can basically have the same pricing as payday lenders if they so choose. And what payday lenders say in response is, you know, that looks like a big APR, but what does the APR look like on a $100 bounce check with 2 NSF fees? It's 1,400%. What does the APR look like on a credit card balance with a $37 late fee, or a utility bill that goes unpaid with a late fee and a reconnect fee? People who need access to emergency cash need that, and lenders need to be able to price to risk. So we've got some great alternatives to put in front of you. Washington State employees, Kevin Foster Ketty is going to be on the panel. For many years, out of Olympia, Washington, they've been offering a product called QCash. And if you look at their website and how they position this, you'll see short-term, small balance loans made available at a $12 per 100 fee. It equates to a 73% APR. Boy, the news media could have a heyday with that, right? But they're saving their members money by helping them meet emergency cash needs with a payday loan alternative product. Closer to home in our backyard, one Detroit credit union has a product called My Pay Today. Their board and their CEO, Hank Hubbard, implemented this about 10 years ago. This is a credit union under $40 million in assets that is mission-based in what they do. Payday alternative loans and being more relevant to underbanked consumers, it can't be about ROI. It has to be about our not-for-profit tax-exempt mission. They're based in Detroit. Their experience with their program, 17% of their members use their product. They charge an annual fee, allow for multiple draws, 18% interest rate. And yes, if they pay a $70 fee and only take out one $500 loan, that's a big APR. But if they're able to have that line of credit, pay the fee, higher risk borrowers, the APR that they end up paying is literally 22% of what they would be paying at a check-and-go payday loan store. Let me play a short clip of Hank Hubbard from one Detroit credit union describing their program.
About a dozen years ago, our board and management team was really concerned about the prevalence of payday lenders in Detroit. So we came up with a product that we designed so that it would be easy to get, it would be a lighter lift on the payment, we'd report it to credit reporting agencies, and it would be far more cost effective. The dramatic thing about My Pay Today is how much money it saves for our members, right? So it costs about a quarter of what they would be paying at a payday lender. So that ends up being the difference between, on our portfolio, they'd pay at Check and Go $1.3 million. With us, it's about $300,000. So it's $1 million that is staying in the community. We were defining success with this product on how many people we can serve, how much money we can save them, and can we do it without losing any money, right? About 20% of our members take advantage of this product. When all is said and done, we clear about $200,000 on this product every year. So it's kind of a break-even product, and, but it's sustainable, and that's what we were looking for. One thing that we've done to try and improve that this year is we've included the ability to make subsequent advances on our mobile app. And I think it's going to make our product even more cost effective because people can do it themselves. One of the challenges that we have is that our whole design for the product was save them money, yes, but then also help them get out of this rut of payday lending, borrowing these small dollars, last minute, short term. We would like to figure out a way to take them along the economic mobility scale and get them out of that rut. And we haven't figured that out yet.
Wouldn't it be great if credit unions could own the messaging around payday loans, embrace it? They're only called payday loans because they're short-term, small-dollar loans to tide you over until your next paycheck. Wouldn't it be nice if our message is we want to put payday lenders out of business by offering similar products at a lower cost, and while doing what Hank's talking about, finding ways to transition people to mainstream credit union services. So kudos to One Detroit. Now the payday loan stores, Advance America is the largest in Michigan and nationally. Guess what? They're focused on customer experience too. If you walk into their stores, you're going to see these pleasant, consumer-friendly stores. I mentioned that 60% of loans are now done online, quick, convenient access to cash, fully disclosed fees, fast, instant approval, money same day, perfect credit not needed. You look at their emphasis on customer satisfaction, clear rates and fee disclosures, testimonials, financial education. And finally, guess what? They're offering reloadable debit cards with some of the neobank features as well. So the message is, again, it's not if we should be offering similar products, in my opinion. It's how do we do it without tarnishing our brand and meeting the needs in a more effective, more cost-effective way. So the key takeaways for me, payday lenders, their growth has slowed, but they're going to be back. We're going to hit a recession sooner or later. Tough times will return. And as that happens, we need to be ready, I think, to serve the needs of financially challenged members. Higher risk borrowers need, whether it's something similar to QCash or My Pay Today, we need to collaborate and find the solutions, in my opinion, to be relevant in this space. We need to fight the negative stigma. I personally think we should stop bashing payday lenders and just say, you know what, there are a lot of bad actors. There are people who overcharge. We can offer similar products, but we can save our members money, and we don't need to shy away from the fact that we make those types of loans because we know those needs are there. And our visibility needs to improve. The good news is we don't have to have the brick and mortar outlets in every urban or rural area next to the check cashing stores, because a lot of this can be done online, but we need to figure out how we get more visible. CU Solutions Group has spun off a company called LifeStep Solutions. We're going to be seeking investment dollars from our Michigan credit community, along with the $2 million that we've invested, to explore some of these feature enhancements to compete with neobanks and some of these payday alternative loan products for our industry. And finally, again, it's not a matter of if, but how. And so we're challenged, and our panel is going to help us explore some of the how behind this important opportunity. Now, we segue from payday lenders to neobanks because a lot of the messaging and the features are similar. I'm going to play a short video of a venture capital funded company called Capway in Mississippi. They haven't even launched their products yet, but the messaging I find very interesting because Mississippi is one of the most financially challenged areas with the highest percentage of underbanked consumers. Entrepreneur and founder Sheena Allen, they're working on an app. Right now they're just messaging that we want to help you. This is not a typical bank. We don't want you to be taken advantage of by others. We're going to have a product, probably a reloadable debit card with payday alternative loan features. And I like her quote that understanding the problem and understanding the people are two different things. Listen to her messaging and ask yourself, is this the kind of messaging that the credit union community should own?
Mississippi has the largest population of unbanked and underbanked residents of any of the 50 states.
You have multiple generations of people who can look in their families and no one owns a home. Thousands of people where no one has a bank account in their whole family.
People have not trusted the system that was supposed to be to help them out. And so what we've noticed that there is a huge kind of disconnection between what the real financial services should be for this population versus what's actually available.
It's just the simple fact that I didn't know. I ain't never knew nothing about credit and how the banking system works. You know, I don't think I knew. Just go to work, make money, buy stuff.
People say when they walk into a bank, they feel like they're a number. For us, it's like we're actually talking to them. Like they're not just a number.
particularly in rural communities. You're either going to have one or two banks or no bank at all, and then that's going to be outweighed by check cashing locations, title loan places, payday lenders.
I have one street, Ellis Avenue in Jackson here, that has over 40 check cashing places. When the only economy is the predatory economy, now you end up participating in the predatory economy that's dragging your community down.
We take them from not knowing the who, the what, to giving them the financial education to make better decisions.
Once you educate them, now you have to offer different services. You have to have the ability to link them with the things they need to move forward. And that's where Capway bridges the gap.
Trying to push another debit card or another product down people's throat. We're really trying to make sure that they become financially healthy. You know, helping people understand where they are and helping them get to where they want to be.
We're coming in to say that we know this is what you need, what your family needs, this is what your community needs. The core component is education. And then we take the tools on top of the education, and now we're helping them to become financially healthy all around.
So these challenges are not purely urban challenges. In small Niles, Michigan, within a 6-mile radius, there are 8 payday loan stores. So this applies to both urban and rural areas where these needs need to be better met by credit unions. So that segues then to the challenger banks and neobanks. And here you see some slide shots. 3 of these are the standalone, mobile-only offerings by Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank, and then other smaller banks that have launched their own digital-only solutions. And I just wanted to give you just a few quick screenshots, and then we'll bring up the panel. So MoneyLion, Varo, Green Dot, Walmart. So MoneyLion, here's some of the messaging. Here we bank. Join millions who are changing the way they bank, invest, and grow. Simple investing, one step at a time. Access to low-rate loans, even for those who are credit challenged. Rewards. Improving your credit score, melding in financial education with their app-based, mobile-only financial services offerings. In the case of Green Dot, they have a reloadable debit card with cash back, with instant messages for purchases, reload at the register with cash at 100,000 plus pharmacies, and you get a portion or all of your paycheck 1 to 2 days early. Those are the things, the features that they're messaging. But Green Dot is also in the business of what's called banking as a service, and so they are the enabler for Walmart's Money Card by Green Dot. And so Walmart is allowing the reload with cash at any of the Walmart stores, same kind of features, get your paycheck a few days early, with the value brand associated with Walmart, powered by Green Dot. Question becomes, why are we letting Walmart and Green Dot and these other providers pop up without really competing with them? It's about features and it's about messaging, not necessarily about having a separate standalone mobile banking offering. So that's what we're going to explore today. With that, I think the key takeaways, and then I'm going to bring up the panel, in the area of neobanks, very similar. They're targeting underbanked and millennials with a message that you can trust us more to offer truly affordable financial services, along with money management tools. That should be our message. Things like 1 to 2 day early payroll deposit. My Green Dot card, the other day, as I'm waking up, I get an instant alert 2 days before payday that the $200 that I earmarked is now in my credit union checking account, or in my Green Dot checking account, my reloadable debit. Think about people who are financially strapped, what that feature means, getting access to your paycheck 1 to 2 days early. Reload at the register, believe it or not, you have members who deal with cash. They like the convenience of being able to take the cash into a pharmacy and say, load it onto my reloadable debit card. Fractional share investing, financial education. We need to own this space, but we're currently slow to respond. At a minimum, we need to understand the feature enhancements and the messaging changes that need to take place. I mentioned our LLC that's being formed to do this. And again, it's not a matter of if, but how to compete against these new players. I frankly think that credit unions have the mission and the ability to offer these features. We just have to get after it and do a better job of messaging that we're the ones who are the most trusted, high-value, low-cost providers. So now I want to welcome to the stage our expert panel. We have Lisa Servan, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of The Unbanking of America. go ahead and come on up. And Kevin Foster-Ketty, who is the CEO of Washington State Employees Credit Union and QCash, and Sean King, who's the founder of UX Ops and a former senior designer at Green Dot. Please welcome the panel.
Thanks, Dave.
Welcome. All right. So to kick this off, we're going to have each of our panelists give a 10-minute presentation on their topic. And I thought it would be best to just run through each presentation, and then I think we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A. So you can fire up your questions through your app, and we'll look forward to a good interactive session. Lisa?
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be here. Last time I was here was actually at the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions conference. How many people were there? Some of you, yeah, several years ago. And Cubbard, who was in your video, took me around Detroit and showed me his branch. So it's terrific to be back. Detroit's really rocking. I thought what I would do is tell you a little bit about research I did particularly on millennials. I have a breakout session later in the afternoon where I'll talk more about my larger projects looking at what we call the unbanked and the underbanked, but people who are financially underserved and financially struggling. I started my work really looking at those terms, looking at the data that the FDIC had collected that show that about 28% of Americans are either quote unquote un- and underbanked. I actually don't like those terms very much, and I can talk about why. But the implication in a lot of the response to that data was that people don't know enough to use banks or credit unions, that there was sort of a perception that people were not smart enough, they were ignorant. And I knew from my own work in low-income communities for decades that that wasn't the case, that if people were using alternative financial services providers like payday lenders, that there was probably a good reason for it. So I set out to figure out what those reasons were. And just as a backdrop for the data I'll show you, I worked for about 4 months at a check casher in the South Bronx, in one of the poorest zip codes in the country, and then as a payday lender in Oakland, California. And then I interviewed hundreds, really, of people who were using these services. And one segment that I looked at that kind of rose out of my research was millennials. So because that's kind of an issue that Dave had said he was talking about, I'll start with that and then say a few words about a couple of the people that we met, because I think it's helpful to get a sense of the stories of the actual people who are using these things and why. So I think you all know who millennials are. They are the largest generation in US history. Translation is a lot of buying power, a lot of spending and use of financial services. And that population is expected to continue to grow as a result of young immigration to the US, so it's not a fixed population. Old millennials, those who were born in the 80s, entered adulthood during the most challenging economic era since the Great Depression, and you really hear the echoes of that when you talk to this group. I think we kind of sell millennials short. We think that they're completely self-involved, that they're not really thinking beyond themselves. But what's interesting, one of the interesting things about this generation is that their definition of success is security and stability as opposed to getting ahead. I know my parents and probably my generation too thought about how can I make more money, climb the ladder. They're feeling really insecure. They have a lot of student debt. The economy has changed so much, and so that's really interesting. And 64% of them say that they're more inclined to save than spend. So in many ways, they are more financially conservative than the generations before because they have a less certain outlook. Over 50% have set financial goals compared with 38% of Americans who are over the age of 38, and they spend a lot of time on their personal finances. They're very stressed when it comes to money. 1 in 4 millennials worry often about their finances, and not having enough money is their top stressor. 23% say financial anxiety makes them physically ill weekly. That's big, or monthly compared to just 12% in the general population. 69% worry about their income versus less than half of the general adult population. And so what I heard when I talked to millennials was really interesting. I think for my generation, I'm the last year of the baby boom. I was born in 1964. My parents, there was this kind of formula about being middle class that you could, if you did all the right things. You know, you go to college, you save money, you have a bank account, you can buy a home, you can have a family, you can have a job that will keep you secure through retirement. That's really different for this generation. They're really thinking when they come out of college, or even sometimes before, when they're deciding whether to take on that debt, I can either have children or I can live in the city I want to live in. I can either have a job that I love or I can save for retirement. So the kind of package that we think of as the middle class bargain you make when you do the right things doesn't exist for this generation, at least not in the same way. College debt is huge. It increased 400% in the 15 years between 1987 and 2002. Americans under 30, average student debt has increased from about 13,000 to 25,000. So they're carrying a lot of debt. This is huge. A lot of them feel like this debt is keeping them from investing in other things like their retirement or having a home. And so this is mostly because college tuition has grown faster than inflation, and young people are really being kind of sold this idea that there is only one path to a good life, and that involves a 4-year college education and kind of a brand college. I mean, this whole college tuition, the college admission scandal that we saw was really kind of an extreme version of people buying into this notion that there's only one way to get to success. As consumers, millennials spend $600 billion annually. They account for 28% of daily consumer spending. And if we think about the long game, this generation's spending is expected to increase by 25% as they begin to buy homes and make longer-term financial investments. So this also connects to what you all do in your credit unions in terms of this kind of financial education, making these big purchases. In terms of financial education, the one time that we know that education really helps, financial literacy, is when people are poised to make a decision. Open an account, buy a home, buy a car. That's when they're sponges, where they're willing and ready to hear. Cash flow. Almost half of millennials anticipate needing a second source of income or a side job. And I saw that over and over again in my interviews with Payday borrowers, that many of them were relying on multiple sources of income. And this is because of one of what I think are the 3 factors that have really been game changers for this generation and even for many older people for whom this kind of bargain of do the right thing and get a middle-class lifestyle hasn't paid off, and that is income volatility. Income volatility, the ability to predict how much money is coming into your household from week to week or month to month, has doubled over the last 30 years. So here we are offering monthly bank statements, thinking about monthly bills, and people don't even know from week to week how much money is coming in. So people are coming in and out of second and third jobs. You know, that quote from Nick Bork from the Pew Charitable Trust, whose research I really respect, talking about borrowing from family and friends, saving, going to the pawn shop. By the time most of the people that I interviewed had gotten to the point of taking out a payday loan, they had already done those things. They had already borrowed from friends and family. They had already been to the pawn shop. So what happens when you pawn your last valuable possession and then the next month you run into this problem again? There needs to be a way to fix it. One of the other things that we saw people, the result of financial security is the last bullet on this slide, which is declining wages, right? So since the 1970s, real wages have declined. 71% of millennials would rather go to a dentist than talk to a banker, right? So trust in banks is way down. 73% are talking about brands. They associate not with the big 4 banks that many of us grew up hearing about, or our community bank, which I went to when I was a kid with my dad, but Google, Amazon, PayPal, maybe it's Walmart, right? 53% don't think their bank offers anything different from other banks. I think this is a real opportunity for credit unions who can differentiate the mission-based work, the fact that you have members and not clients, the fact that interest rates are lower, so really capitalizing on that. And 33% they think that they won't need a bank at all in the future. All 4 of the largest banks made the list of most disliked brands among millennials. Again, a real opportunity for you guys. Those 4 banks hold more than half of all Americans' assets. Banking services in millennials. 97% are using online banking interfaces. 83% say fees matter. 62% use peer-to-peer payments, and 41% have downloaded a money management app. That's a big game changer too. They're really willing to do a lot on their phone. I know my 82-year-old mother will not do anything on her phone, but this is a very different group. Did I talk about that? Yeah, trust in banks, yes. 78 to 92% don't trust banks, compared with 5% of the general population. So again, a real need for credit unions to differentiate themselves from banks. 2 in 3 feel banks don't understand their needs. 1 in 3 would be open to switching banks in the next 30 days. And I think that's a really important statistic because it's not that easy to switch banks, right? You have to transfer all this information, hook up your bills to a different site. And so that's critical that they are actually willing to change. I want to leave you with just a couple of short, quick vignettes about some of the millennials that we interviewed as part of our work. Kendra is the first one. She served in the Army for 4 years before returning to school. Her house was foreclosed in the wake of the financial crisis. Her mortgage payments were higher than her earnings. She actually rented out her house to try to make the mortgage payments and lived in a much cheaper apartment. And talking about this kind of new middle class, Kendra told us, she said, I never want to buy another house. I'm buying my next car with cash. So yeah, my parents had the American dream. Good for them. It's never going to be for me, and I don't want it anymore. So really kind of distancing herself. Dina is a woman who is a master's student in her early 30s. She said, I'm graduating this semester. I almost had a heart attack when I looked at the student loan calculator. I got this new job, and it's a good job. It's a job in my field. It's a job that I wanted to get with this degree. But I'm still looking at these payments and looking at my salary and looking at other stuff that I might want to do in the next 10 years, like maybe go on vacation or buy some shoes, take a bubble bath. Even looking at the income-based payment, it's like $750 a month. That's huge. And one final one, Jackie, another graduate student in her late 20s, she's worried about her own future and also in this sandwich generation where she wants to have children but is worried about having to take care of her mother who's not doing well. She said, I'm very overwhelmed and scared. I didn't have any support system. Undergrad and grad, I put myself through school. I had to do everything between loans to pay for this crazy expensive education and then just the cost of living. Then also my mom, she has no type of retirement, no type of savings. She gets paid really bad now. She's always struggled. So looking back maybe 5 years ago, I was always like, oh, I'll be able to take care of her. Now I'm looking at where I am. I can't see a clear path moving forward. So I showed you these stories because I think they're pretty typical of the challenges facing millennials and also a place where credit unions can really play a role in filling the gap.
Thank you, Lisa. By the way, if you haven't, yes, big round of applause. If you haven't read Lisa's book, The Unbanking of America, I highly recommend it. I really loved it. And maybe just a quick question before we transition to Kevin, and that is, from your Payday loan store research and your experience in working in those stores and interacting with the actual customers, what is the main takeaway for banks and credit unions? What's your main message to banks and credit unions?
Well, I think for both my experiences as a check casher and a Payday lender teller, there were really 3 things when I talked to people when I asked them why they were choosing to use these services. The first was cost, although that applies a little bit less to Payday lenders, but I could tell you why it matters for check cashers, and I will in my later session. Transparency. So again, if you think about the video clip you showed with Nick Bork, that's kind of vilifying the Payday lenders, but you see this one chart with the prices. Those charts are huge, huge in terms of, by law, they're posted in the lobbies. And so even though the prices are high, people know what they're paying and they don't feel like they've been tricked. When it's opaque, when there's no information, when you have a 40-page disclosure agreement, people feel like they're getting taken advantage of. And the third thing was service. I think usually the portrayal of these stores is kind of some shady place with a blinking neon light and it looks dangerous. The stores I worked in were really bright, I was trained very thoroughly in customer service. I was told to use a customer's name 3 times in every transaction, how to hold my body, not to be distracted, and people appreciated that. They trusted us.
Great perspective. So we're going to transition now to Kevin Foster-Ketty, who, as I said, he's the CEO at Washington State Employees Credit Union, and they have a QSO called QCash, and they have been providing payday alternative loans for some time in a very unique and effective way. So please welcome Kevin. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Thank you. First I'd just like to thank Dave for inviting me. I started in credit unions a long time ago, and in fact, a small credit union that was literally in a metal box. Any of you familiar with you? You pulled out the account card, you posted it manually, and that's how you did your P&L and balance sheet. Some of you remember that. So I've been in credit unions for over 40 years. And the Michigan League was always the premier league in the country. In my education, I grew up in Washington, and we're always saying, well, what does the Michigan League do? So thank you. It's very much an honor to speak to this group. You guys are leaders in the industry and have been for a long time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a CEO perspective and give you the perspective from a CEO's why we got into this. So there's 2 main reasons, strategy and brand. It fit our strategy and it fit our brand. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. We have 3 ways we look at strategy based on scientific views of the world, believe it or not. So the first is, many of you may be familiar with Isaac Newton, the Enlightenment period, the scientific revolution. Newton believed that he could find the one truth if he just studied hard enough. How that translates into business practice, practices is there is a best practice. You may have heard a regulator talk to you about, hey, this is a best practice. A best practice implies that there is one truth. So there are a lot of parts of our business which are best practice, as we discovered when we stepped outside best practices in commercial lending. The second scientific perspective is that of Einstein. Einstein believed that, no, there's no one truth. It all depends on your position in space and time. So that reflects in business practices as differentiation. If I can get a special position, I can outcompete with the people that I'm trying to outcompete. So that's differentiation. Now, where QCash comes in is Darwin. Darwin said it's not the strongest species that survives. It's not the most intelligent species that survives. It's the species that's most adaptable to change. So we take that, and that's called complexity science, and we take that as adapt and evolve. There are certain parts of our business that are adapt and evolve. Get in it, adapt, evolve as you go along, and that's what we've done with QCash. So let's switch a little bit to branding. A lot of people talk about branding, and one of the formats that we use for branding is something called brand archetypes. Many, many, many companies use this to communicate the essence of their brand to their target customer or their target members. In our case, we use the caregiver brand. The caregiver brand is typically used, one of the 3 brands that's typically used in financial services. The others are ruler and creator. So most big banks are ruler archetypes. We chose to take the caregiver archetype. Many credit unions take what they call the regular guy archetype. It doesn't work as well anymore. The regular guy archetype worked for credit unions for a long time because the regular guy is a sense of belonging is what you're looking for. And an occupational credit union, in the past, a lot of credit unions were occupationally based, and so there was a sense of belonging for that credit union membership. Today, that no longer exists. So we are embracing the caregiver brand. Just to give you a couple of examples, my son has a business, or did have a business. He was successful and sold it, but his archetype was the jester. Have fun. Life is too short. People worry about things too much. So that's the jester archetype, and you see that with a company like Burger King. The guy with the thing running around. My wife has a business. It's a marina. And when we first got onto that, and this was my contribution to the thing, what brand is the marina? And so we first thought it might be the Explorer brand, but as we looked into it more, we discovered, no, it's the Innocent brand. Kids nostalgia, so we have an ice cream machine. When you come to our marina, when we have live music, it's a bunch of kids running around and families having fun, and it's exploded. Once we got the right brand and started communicating it, it just became extremely successful. So that's the branding. So you've got strategy, you've got branding, and you've got to put those 2 together. So how did QCash get started? It started with a teller. A teller noticed something in the money orders. She said, these money orders people are coming into our branches, and they're buying money orders, and they're using them to pay their bills, and it's clogging up the teller line. So we got to increase our prices on money orders to drive them out of the branch. And I said, that doesn't sound right to me. So we started talking. I said, so give me some numbers. I'm a numbers guy, obviously, CEO, so I'm often a numbers guy. So I said, give me some numbers. So we went through the analysis and did some numbers, and it turned out that $1 million a year was going out of the credit union to payday lenders. And I said, whoa, we better check that out. So we started working on it, and we were going to offer it. Now, it's interesting about the pawnbroker, because 15 years ago, 16 years ago when we started this, it was very controversial, and payday lenders were evil. And we had one board member, John Pittman, and his brother was a pawnbroker, and he said, oh, no, we need to get into this. And so he was the champion on our board that led us through the process to get payday lending going. And we started with a very simple manual process, and actually our first payday lending customer, she came in and we got to talking to her and said, you don't need a payday loan, you need a consolidation loan. And so we consolidated her debts, and we didn't make the first loan we could have made on payday lending because we're a credit union, right? We look at the customer, we think about that member, and we figure out a way to solve their problem. So we did a manual process. We lost money for 4 years. And then we got one of our operational executives on it. He started grinding on that thing operationally. Grind. How can we make this automated? How can we make it faster? How can we cut the costs out? And so we did, and it's worked out well. Where that led us, and this is where the strategy comes in and why the adapt and evolve strategy is very effective, is that it led us to a lot of things. It led us into data analytics. It led us into experience engineering. It led us into cloud technology. All these things from a strategic standpoint that came from this little product we had called QCash changed the way our company operates. It changed the way we got a data science department now. We got an experience engineering department now. We're right in the middle of doing a complete reorganization to embed agile processes in our entire organization. That would not have happened without QCash starting out in this adapt and evolve practice that we took. So it's been very good for us in a lot of ways and very good for our members. So where are we today? We're doing well. It's interesting. U.S. Bank just announced in the last couple of weeks a payday lending product. Now, it's not as good as ours. It's slower. It's not as adaptable and so forth, but it is a validation that this product is becoming mainstream. Where are we headed in the future? Well, it's very exciting because as we learned about payday lending, we continue to talk to our members. We said, hey, we got to figure something else out here because these members are struggling, and we give them the loan, but we got to think further down the pike. What can we do for them? So we took the same technologies we had learned about, and we started applying them to payday lending. So we're in test right now with a financial wellness app. A financial wellness app where we took technologies from the medical field. We have one of our employees, I was talking to her this last week, and her child was just diagnosed with diabetes. And so how are they treating that diabetes? She has a little patch on her arm that connects to her phone that gives her feedback on what she's doing that causes her diabetes to get worse or better. It's called digital health therapies. Digital health therapies. We took those technologies and we applied them to financial wellness. So now we're testing an app that uses predictive analytics on the cash flow. So we can predict when they have enough money to save and queue them up and say, hey, you got money to save. Do you want to save? Hit a button, you're done. Or you're going to be a shortfall in 2 weeks. You're going to have a shortfall in 2 weeks. What do you want to do about it? We have 4 options. Pick one, click the button, you're done. So it's button-faced. In addition, we've hooked up with Balance and developed a personalized coaching mechanism delivered through SMS texting with a scorecard that the counselor can see as they're talking to the client that's populated from the financial institution's own data. So now the client does not have to fill out any forms, does not have to talk, the data's already there. The counselor sees all the data in real time. They can see exactly what's happening on the account. Complete transparency between client and counselor. We've also gamified the process, so we have short videos that they have to go through to qualify for a counselor. It's a very, very powerful tool, and it's using the same tools that you see on Facebook and Google to get this. It's called cognitive behavioral tools, is what they're called, and they incent people. They give them the right stimulation at the right time to do the right thing. It's using these very, very powerful tools, helping people self-manage their financial situation. So this is where QCash has led us. Transformed the company in terms of our technology use, helped us see new products, and we got more new products in the pipeline coming. So what I would say to you is, it's going well. Credit unions can do this. And one thing I should mention, I'm remiss in not mentioning this, is that in 2017, we won the Financial Times Innovation of the Year Award. Now, you might not know who the Financial Times is. They're a global financial publication. They have double the circulation of the Wall Street Journal. And we won for innovation, and Alibaba's Ant Financial won for impact. So we're on stage, and my executive's on stage in London with Alibaba and its WSCCU winning a global award for technology. Credit unions can compete. Credit unions can compete in this space. You just have, what's your strategy, what's your brand, and then just follow that and you will get there. And we've been very successful and it's been a lot of fun, and the future is extremely bright right now. We are ahead of most institutions. US Bank came out late with this. I'm sure that there will be others who figure this financial wellness thing out, probably not as good as we have, but we're still ahead of them and we'll continue to be ahead of them. The financial wellness app also, it doesn't just serve underserved. The underlying technologies can help anybody do a better job of managing their own finances. Save more, spend less. We'll iterate and give you the feedback in real time about what you're doing so you can self-manage your own situation. Very powerful tools. You know, we love this. Our staff are energized. We hire the best people. We're pulling people from Starbucks and Amazon coming into our shop because millennials want to work for companies that are doing cool stuff and that care about the customer, the member. Thank you, David.
Fabulous. Round of applause. So one quick question before we transition to our third panelist, Sean King. We talked about this at dinner last night. You're a multi-billion-dollar credit union, and your core membership is state employees in Olympia, Washington. Yep. How do you compartmentalize the risk associated with these higher risk, short-term, small balance loans?
Yes, that's a good question, and it's something we talk about a lot in our organization. Credit unions, by their nature, their structure, boards of credit unions are risk averse. In a bank, the director has an incentive to make money because if they're whatever the risk they're going to take pays off, they're going to get paid. Individually, personally, they're going to get paid. In a credit union, they're risk averse. So I'm not going to take a risk because my board is going to get upset. The members will go after the board, and you're going to have this feedback loop. So what we've done is we've developed QSOs. In the QSO, we put a little box around the risk. We put that risk in a box and say, okay, we're going to bet the crop, not the farm. And that was very much more acceptable and all through my career is we want to take some risks. You know, they've changed the regulations. We want to take some risks. There's new stuff coming out. We want to take some risks. Let's put it in the QSO. It's boxed up. There's a finite amount we can lose. It's not going to disturb the regular business. That's the way we've done it, and it's been successful. I've been involved with investment QSOs and mortgage QSOs and now a software company. So it really is effective if you want to move forward as setting it up in a QSO.
Thank you. So our third panelist, I'm really excited to introduce Sean King, who's the founder and CEO of UX Ops, and he's a former senior designer for Green Dot, but he's really a very smart guy when it comes to neobanks and challenger banks in this changing landscape. So please welcome Sean King.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me, and this is my first time to Michigan. It's just a beautiful state. I'm really enjoying my time, so thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm really humbled to be up here with Kevin, Lisa, and Dave. I'm not a credit union person, or I should say that I'm starting to become one as I learn more about it.
Much better.
Yeah, but I am kind of an outsider a little bit, and I do come more from the fintech space and also the very large mega bank space. I was at Union Bank as well. And so that's kind of the perspective that I have. And so I did not know as much about credit unions in general and credit union membership. So I had to do a little research. And so my background really is in user research. And maybe a lot of this is not new to you, but perhaps seeing it through my beginner's eyes will be useful to you as well. So from my research, it seems to me that there's nothing that neobanks or fintech startups are offering today that almost any credit union can't also offer their members. And I think that's been made clear by Kevin and some of the things that he said. And I think, honestly, it just comes down to picking one strategy and direction and then just getting after it. And credit unions are already pretty great at staying focused on understanding their members, which is, that's the thing that struck me the most, is when I kind of dug into the credit union industry and really started to understand the differences between a credit union mission versus a bank, or definitely with a VC-funded fintech. Totally different priorities and different alignment. So that's really good news, is that you already have that focus on the member, which is really key. And that being said, it's really important to look at what's going on in the neobank and fintech world, because there's a whole lot that you can steal, that I think will help with your positioning and thinking about your feature set. So I think there's 5 steps, and the first one is know your members. Second one is to understand their preferences. Third is understand how exactly they're shopping for a financial institution. And then fourth, understand how the neobanks are acquiring their customers. It's actually not anything exotic that you probably aren't already doing yourself. And then 5 is identify, analyze, and borrow the best ideas. So knowing your members is both about knowing who they are today and then also who they will be tomorrow. And again, I'm coming from the outside, so I actually partnered with Elizabeth Rowe, who is a strategist and a researcher in the credit union industry and a CU Insights author, and I asked her to just get me all the latest data and trends so that I could include that here and kind of wrap my mind around it a little bit. So this is national credit union demographics, and it's important to note that yours may be completely different. But I think this is an interesting lens to look at things through, especially when we're talking about millennials and the younger, underbanked audiences and segments, because this is who your members are today, right? The average member age is 47, and of those, 46% are over the age of 52, so it skews older. Credit union members are younger than community banks, but significantly older than the top national and regional banks. It's also interesting, I found this really fascinating. Relative to the general population, credit union members are more likely to be female, be married, have a college degree, be employed full-time, and own a home. And so I think that's significant because when you're talking about targeting millennials and the underbanked, it might require a little bit of a shift in your strategy and your branding. So let's talk about who your members will be tomorrow. So 20% of 18 to 24-year-olds today consider credit unions their primary financial institution. But by age 34, half of them are leaving credit unions. So why is that happening? That's a pretty big churn rate, right? That's 50% attrition. And it might seem obvious, but I mean, their financial lives are changing significantly in that time. They're maybe getting married, combining accounts with a spouse, they're paying off student loans, they're buying a house. Their priorities are shifting. And whether it's true or not, the perception is that credit unions are not capable, or they're not being seen as capable or sophisticated enough of handling these new challenges for them. And so they're looking elsewhere. And so where neobanks and fintechs in general come into this is that this is all happening at the same time that there's this huge explosion of these new services that have it down to a science to target these very same consumers with really, really good marketing and really good distribution. So these members are churning out of credit unions right when they're entering their peak earning years, which is obviously problematic. So maybe we can look a little bit at what are their preferences, like how are they interacting with their financial institutions today, because that can give us some clues about how we might change the way that we're prioritizing certain features or offerings. So all credit union members are interacting with their financial institutions more frequently, and this is across all generations. Transaction volumes are up year over year 15 and 20%. And what's driving that is digital. So as of 2018, mobile and online they're still the preferred channels for consumers. But younger members are using digital much more frequently than older members. I think that might seem kind of obvious. And the older members are heavier users of branches. But the most satisfied members are those branch-dependent digital users. So they're coming into the branch quite a bit, actually, like that's their main touch point, but they still use the digital offerings quite a bit. So the second most satisfied group are the digitally dependent branch users. This is more likely to be like your millennials, that they would prefer not to go into the branch, but they still like having it. So they do go there, and we'll get to that on the next slide, but both of these groups, the two most satisfied groups, they value having both the digital and the physical channel options. So a millennial, 3/4 of millennials have been to a branch in the past 3 months, and that's pretty significant. And so that seems to align with the credit union initiatives to maintain the relevancy of their branches while they kind of continue building out their digital offerings. So then it might be important to look at how are they actually shopping and choosing a financial institution. So the motivation in this order is, number one, lowest fees, which I think credit unions have like a pretty good lock on that. Maybe it's not being communicated properly, but it's there. Number two is the presence of a local branch. That's another one. You already have that. Recommendations of family and friends, probably another strength in the credit union space. And reputation and interest rates. I think reputation is another big one, especially locally. So there's three kind of buckets or segments. There's the features motivated. 42% of members are considered features motivated, and the thing that they care about most is having great online and mobile tools. Yep. And so they care mostly about things like P2P and PFM. Then you have the value motivated segment. That's 28% of your members. They are looking for the best overall value for the money, which is a little bit more difficult to define. But what's interesting about this group is that only 16% even mentioned online and mobile banking services. Like, that just is not a priority for them. And then you have the fee-motivated segment. So all they care about is who's going to give me the lowest fees. So the other thing is looking at where touch points are going, and this goes back to the earlier slide where we were talking about the difference between the generations, the branch-dependent, digitally active users, and then the digitally dependent branch users. So between 2012 and 2018, ATM usage is down to just a few times a year. Branch visits continue trending down to just a few visits per year. Online usage is down from a few times per month to a few times per year. That's a pretty big drop. But mobile banking is up to almost a few times per month now, on average. And then live agent phone support is also up a few times per year. So let's look quickly at how neobanks are acquiring their customers. It's actually not exotic. It's the same way that I think credit unions and traditional banks do it. They are building market share and share of wallet the same way as you do, which is to have a checking account or an individual product that they use where they kind of bring you into the funnel and then slowly introduce other offerings over time. And so regardless of what their first main product is that they bring you in with, it seems that they all have an entry point product, whether that's investing or deposits or lending. Then they're leveraging the customer knowledge that they glean from the actual analytics and the product usage. And then they're forecasting and prioritizing new features and products that they can offer because they know how it will be used and they've seen how you've been using their other products. So this is a pretty huge space, the digital banking space, $9 trillion by 2024, and over 75% of that is on the retail banking side, so highly relevant for credit unions. And I'm just going to fly through these, but the whole point of this is basically to just look at the neobanks and fintech startups that are most relevant to your unique membership and decide what you should borrow based on their needs. And also thinking about not only who your members are today, but where you would like them to be tomorrow, who you would like them to be tomorrow, which fintechs and neobanks are already kind of targeting them, and then kind of understanding their messaging, their feature set, and then just, there's nothing wrong with borrowing great ideas. So which ones make the most sense for your members? Really, that should be up to you, and you have to keep tabs on who your membership is in order to do that. Where do you already offer a features, a value, or a fee advantage? And then think about how you could reposition or modify your existing products, or think about developing and introducing new similar products similar to what Kevin was talking about. And there's just a lot here, but essentially there's just a lot of examples of fintech startups. This one in particular is interesting to me because they're actually marketing themselves as FDIC insured. The way that they're doing that is that every night they're sweeping funds into an FDIC insured account. So they themselves are not actually FDIC insured, but they kind of market themselves that way because every night they're just sweeping that money into a different account. So investing is a little bit tough for credit unions, but there's a lot of startups in this space. It's enormous, and it continues to expand. And if you look at like Robinhood, they had a botched initial offering of their debit product, but all of these startups are starting to offer, they're going the other way around. Rather than bringing people in with the checking, they're bringing people in with the investing, and then they're coming back around on the other side and offering checking-like products. So that's a challenge. And then lending, of course, we've been talking about payday lending, but there's also a lot of interesting things happening at point of sale. So whether online or physical, there's a lot of new fintech startups coming up around this idea of installment loans that are less expensive or free even if you pay it back on time. And this is a space, I think, which would be really, really interesting for credit unions to get involved in more heavily. And yeah, so key takeaways: continuously understand your membership, anticipate their needs better than ever before, keep tabs on their channel preferences, and understand those 3 types of shoppers. And you're already pretty well positioned to compete with just some minor adjustments and doing your homework. Think about how you could offer some new innovative checking and savings accounts, digital-only products, maybe leverage a partner to manage the infrastructure for you, because that's a huge piece of it. Investment accounts that are more appealing to younger members. And then I think the installment loans and point-of-sale loans thing is really, really interesting. So you don't have to beat fintechs or neobanks. You can think about strategic partnerships. You can think about how you would add best-in-class features to your product roster. And that way you're kind of sticking with the trusted brand, adding security, and maybe a slightly different product mix than you already offer. But I think you could, with some minor adjustments, really get closer to being ready to compete with some of these new startups.
So as you can see, the bad news is we have a wealth of information on this stage in a very short period of time. The good news is that each of the panelists has a breakout session this afternoon, so please take advantage of those. Big round of applause for Sean King. Now, hopefully, you've taken some time to upload your questions through your mobile app, and we'll look forward to seeing some of those on the screen here to ask some questions of the panelists. And while I'm waiting for that, I see them coming up here. One question: how do we simplify our message for millennials? Lisa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think you have to really think about what millennials, if you think about what their issues are with traditional mainstream institutions. I think on the credit union side, I think Sean's data was really interesting that so few are using credit unions, and then that they are graduating out of millennials or choosing not to use them. So I think one thing is really communicating all of the things that you do that they don't realize you're doing. Because I don't think it's just that, gee, you're not providing all of the services that these other institutions are, but I think you're actually, that's part of it, but you're actually doing a lot of it already and they don't realize it. And the other thing is, I would think about using some of the terms that some of the social impact businesses are doing, like the Toms of the world and those who are trying to do well by do good, which was one of the taglines of one of the slides that you put up there, and show them that it's membership, not client consumer. So I think part of it is, a lot of it is a marketing piece of it, that they can trust you, differentiating yourselves from banks, and that you're already offering a lot of the things that they think they need to leave in order to get.
Based on research, and now in the trenches, Kevin, you run a multi-billion-dollar credit union. What are your thoughts on how we simplify the messaging for millennials?
Well, that's tough. I mean, I think putting millennials all in a bucket is dangerous. It's blocking and tackling. This is not rocket science. You segment the market, understand where you are, understand the local conditions. We have a term in the credit union called hyperlocalism. In Seattle, there are a bunch of neighborhoods. There's a bunch of discrete neighborhoods, and the people in those neighborhoods care about what's happened in their neighborhood. So part of the marketing is getting into those communities and just making yourself known as a community partner. One of our most successful things is we just do a lot of community outreach. We probably spend 4 times the average financial institution on what we call community give back, but it's really about getting into discrete markets where you're known and figuring out each market. We're all over the state of Washington. Every market's different. Eastern Washington is different than Western Washington. Urban is different than rural. And there's millennials in all of them, so they all have different needs and different, but if you get into their communities and show that you are with them, you're part of the community, you share their interests and concerns. I could go on and on about some of the community research we've done, but it's blocking and tackling, doing your research, being on the ground, and then you'll get those accounts. They'll come in and say, I didn't know, but you got to educate. But they don't trust. Marketing messages sometimes are. There's no magic wand about marketing messages. What we found more effective is getting in their communities where they live, being involved in their lives, and then they hear about it from their friends and word of mouth.
Sean, you've done a lot of great research on neobanks and challenger banks, and there are a few that kind of rise to the top in terms of awareness, like the Walmart products powered by Green Dot. When you think of features and how they're messaged and what credit unions ought to be focused on in their mobile banking solutions, what are some of the features that are most compelling to millennials and other consumers?
Sure. I think strong PFM, that's a big one. You saw that in a lot of the data that the features-focused members, which tend to be younger, that's a big one. It's almost like we're at this table stakes moment where younger consumers are already using things like Mint and other apps like that, and it seems to be the most popular apps are the ones that really harness that and do a good job of infusing that directly inside of the app in a way that it is relevant to them. Is not, you don't just want to throw a bunch of charts and data at them. You need to make it very contextual and relevant to them.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on regulation? Should we be advocating for more regulation or less regulation, or just better disclosure and better practices by financial institutions in the area of payday lending?
It's always dangerous to talk about advocating for regulation in a room of financial institutions.
It's a loaded
However, I did support the payday lending rule that the CFPB was prepared to roll out before Richard Cordray left heading up that agency and Mick Mulvaney came in for a couple of reasons. One is I thought that it was useful to have a federal standard, that it was so 15 states not doing lending at all, a lot of variation in terms of rates and a lot of complicated issues in terms of what a payday loan meant from one state to another. Also, I think that while it's really difficult to determine ability to pay, which was one of the features of that regulation, I think it's important to think about that. And what happened, and I think the data show this, is that even in anticipation of those rules being rolled out, a lot of payday lenders started shifting from the lump sum traditional payday loan. You get the loan, you pay it back in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on when your next paycheck is, to installment loans. So installment loans do give people longer time to repay, shorter, smaller chunks that they can bite off, and the interest rates tend to be lower. And I think some people like Elevate, also Opportune, which is a very small lender in California, but it's doing loans for about 36% instead of 400, 500%, are showing that they can make a profit. So I think some regulation is good and protects the consumer. But I do think, for example, I wrote a piece recently about the AOC Sanders 15% credit card interest cap that was proposed. I don't think that's a good idea because I think the interest rate is simply too low to serve many of the people that these cards serve. So I think it's a delicate balance, but I think some regulation is important.
So we might wrap up on this question, and I think in your book, The Unbanking America, from your research and your experience, one of the main premises was really, if I can paraphrase, is that the reason we have payday lenders and check cashers is because the needs of these consumers have not been met by traditional banks and credit unions, for that matter. So with that premise, I'm going to pose a question to you, Kevin. This is from the audience. What needs to change so that credit unions are more relevant to these consumers and payday lenders are less relevant? What needs to change?
Well, you have to offer the product. I mean, that's simply, you have to offer the product, and you can offer the product on your terms and the way you want to do it, but you got to get in there and you got to get in the action. And that's what we decided to do, and we saw that $1 million going out a year, that's a lot of money, and that was 16 years ago. I mean, it was a lot. I think we've made like $200 million of payday loans in that period. We've saved our members, gosh, I don't know, $4 or $5 million in fees. You got to get in the market and start doing the product. I mean, if it doesn't fit your strategy, don't do it. But it leads to other things. We're looking at small business lending using the same tools. So yeah, I say you get in. You got to start working.
Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. I think they did a terrific job. So as a wrap, I guess I would say again, in my humble opinion, it's not a matter of if, but how credit unions can become more relevant in meeting the needs of the underbanked, whether it's payday alternative loans or reloadable debit cards with different features, understanding the needs of the underbanked and modifying your products and the features associated. And along with the products, the messaging needs to change. We should own the messaging. We're the most trusted, we're the most consumer friendly, but oftentimes I think credit unions have a tendency to do the core things they've done so well year over year over year, and they're kind of letting other providers sneak in and out-message us. And this isn't about market share, in my opinion. This is about service and mission-based offerings. And you all know that. We're preaching to the choir. I look forward on behalf of MCUL and CUSG to collaborating to find the solutions to take us to the next level. One final reminder, again, each of our panelists will have a breakout session this afternoon. You'll have an opportunity to sit in on the session of your choice and get a lot more detailed information. So enjoy the rest of the conference. One more round of applause for our panel, and we'll turn it back to Brandy.